I would recommend that, if people are really finding it hard to develop that breaking strength in their split jerk, this may be a form of training intervention that could be helpful for you. If you're going to incorporate it, make sure that you're, 12, 16 weeks out or further out from a competition, and that you're able to kind of separate your clean from your jerk and have some changes in your technique that are going to take some time to develop.
Hi, Kurt. It's my pleasure to have you on the Evidence Strong show. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, of course. My name's Kurt Roderick. I'm recently just completed my master's degree at Lehman College in human performance. I'm also been coaching weightlifting for about 12 years. Specifically, I'm the owner of Murder of Crows, which is located in Brooklyn and one of the larger clubs of New York State. Mostly, I coach on the national level, and national champions, but I've also had members of my club who were former world team members for other various countries. And I have my national coaching certification with USA Weightlifting.
Jerks are pretty special. The snatch and clean, we are pretty clear what is needed to succeed. But with the jerk, it's not so obvious. Strong athletes have problems. The athletes who have good technique in snatch, for example, they will still sometimes have troubles with jerk. So something is special about the jerk.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, the phrase was it snatch what you can and then clean and jerk what you must. But the jerk is what really determines who's going to be the champion, who's taking home that gold medal from that competition. And if they just, you can just flub it. It's so easy to flub it, or just to get a press out, or, you push it a little too far forward, you're out of position. And there's nothing worse than standing up a beautiful, easy clean and then just failing on that jerk. And it's so tough. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's also the last lift of the competition too. So
I was looking at a recent competition. It was like the American Open finals, and I was looking at all the different percentages of the makes and misses for the different things. And that last clean and jerk, it was like 20% make compared to, like, on average, it was like 60, 70. But it's just people throwing up that last number to get that total that they need, and missing that jerk. The one athlete that I have developed, and he did go on and win a national championship. The jerk was his kryptonite. So he spent a lot of time thinking about that. He was very much a snatch specialist. He could snatch incredibly well and fairly consistently, but the jerk was something that he struggled so mightily with. And then I have, a number of athletes that tried to do it. So being willing to experiment and look at different ways at how we can improve the jerk was just so key for myself in the experimentation that I did in with my club, that when I decided that I would like to advance my degree and gain more knowledge, and look to the literature and the scientific research, I realized that, for one, the scientific research is lacking more in the jerk compared to the snatch and the clean. The pulling derivatives are much more plentiful in the literature than jerk. So I felt, okay, there's something I can contribute here. There's something I want to learn here. So that's why I did start exploring the split jerk specifically as being something that I'd want to do research on. We have the upper body component to it. It's an explosive movement. We starting to get a little bit more research on it. We are seeing the correlation with performance increases in other sports, similar to what we see in the pulling derivative. And yet it's a different stimulus than the pulling derivative, with it going over, the barbell going overhead. And I think, some of the other sports are now a little less fearful of doing overhead work. So they're a little more, what's the word I want to say? They're ready to listen. And as we need to make sure that the research is correct and is good and it's plentiful, to be able to give them the correct way to be able to utilize the jerk and other overhead weightlifting derivatives, like the push press or behind the neck jerk, or, even the shoulder press.
yeah, for sure. All right, let's go into your study. Should I ask about the why? You did something different in your study. You did not only look at the jerk, but you tried to manipulate the load in a very specific way. So could you explain how you went about designing your study and what were you trying to find out?
Yes, of course. So, as we were talking about the jerk is a little bit different than the snatch and clean in the sense that it starts with a counter movement, right? We have the dip phase and we have our thrust phase. And then if anyone's performed the split jerk or push press with a pause in the dip, you know how essential it is to make sure that you can dip down and then drive back up fluidly to be able to put the barbell over your head. So we're using that stretch shortening cycle, and it's going to be key. If we're doing the stretch shortening cycle, we know that there's different ways that we can manipulate that eccentric phase, that eccentric muscle action, to be able to enhance or to continue to train that stretch shortening cycle to get better benefits. So we know that increasing the muscle tension during the eccentric phase will help us. So if we're braking better, we're able to decelerate that barbell in the jerk, we're going to be able to put it back over our head more effectively with more power. Now, weightlifting coaches have always known this, and they've used things like the jerk dip. So just performing a partial movement where they're overloading the eccentric phase, they're just dipping down, they don't put it overhead. But other forms of exercises, they've used things like accentuated eccentric loading, so AEL, and that's because we can overload the eccentric muscle action up to about 140%, depending on the movement, than the concentric phase. So the way we do this, you could use fancy machines and cables for other movements, but in most of us in the weight room, we're using these things called weight releasers, right? So they clip onto the barbell. They're a little bit heavier. You go down to the bottom of your movement, they come off, and then you can finish the movement coming back up with a lighter load. So you're able to perform the movement in the free of kind of interruption, and you're able to perform the whole movement, but you get to load that eccentric phase higher, and so therefore hopefully getting a more effective stimulus for increasing that braking phase, which then can be translated to performance later on in that movement, as well as other power movements or even strength training. And literature does seem to support this in things like our back squat, bench press, front squat. They've done leg press, a leg extension. They've looked at these chronic adaptations, but most of the movements are not things like the split jerk, which are so ballistic and so explosive. They have a much longer eccentric phase. Now, the dip in the split jerk is about 1/10 of your height, so it's very short. We're just talking about maybe 8, 12 centimeters or a couple inches. But in a back squat, most of us are going to be squatting down fairly low. It's a longer eccentric phase. It's a little bit slower. So the research really wasn't there to see, is this going to work for the split jerk and this type of movement? Theoretically, it seemed like it should. And there is one study on the counter movement jump. So we have a relatively short eccentric phase that's pretty explosive. I believe Shepard did the study on volleyball players, and they had people using dumbbells in their hands. They dip down and then they performed the jump, letting go of the dumbbells. Those who did that seemed to improve their jump height better, peak power, peak velocity, etc., better than if they just performed the counter movement jump without the dumbbells. So some evidence that maybe this could work in the split jerk situation, but no research on it. So I'm looking at all this. I'm like, I want to try it. I want to see if this is going to work. So, I'm doing my studies, doing my master's degree, and I'm just kind of playing around with it with a couple lifters, kind of, an early pilot study, if you will. Is this feasible? How would you do it? What would it look like? And then, one of my lifters said, I think this is working, but, and in case of N1, so I'm like, I don't know if it's working. It's just we got stronger. We did better on the split jerk. So, I proposed it to my committee and they're like, cool, let's take a look. So that's kind of how I first came about the reason for why I would want to do this study and, began figuring out what it would look like.
So you decided to run the study. So now how did you go about designing the study?
Yeah, so so it's a longitudinal study. We're looking at 8 training weeks. They were training the split jerk twice a week up to about 10 working sets, except for the 4th week, which we had a mid-intervention testing on the split jerk during the 4th week. So we only trained it 5 working sets that particular week. We had our traditional group, which was performing the split jerk, plus they were doing jerk dips at the weight of the eccentric load for the AEL group. They also were performing back squats twice a week with the split jerk, and then they were performing on 2 separate days the snatch, the clean, and pulling derivatives, because there's just no way you're going to get a bunch of weightlifters not to train for 8+ weeks. And even then we had problems recruiting. We had, with the testing, we did 2 testing days in the beginning of the study and 2 testing days at the end of the study. It just meant 10 weeks of not being able to train. That means 10 weeks of not preparing for competition, so it took us almost a year to get enough
Mm.
subjects because we would recruit and then a competition would be coming up. So we try to recruit right after they finish that competition and get as many people as we could. So we had 18 people, 9 men, 9 women, be able to sign up for the study. They all had to have 1 year of training the split jerk as part of a weightlifting program, or they could do CrossFit, though we didn't get any CrossFitters. They were all weightlifters. When 3 people drop out, the 2 people had never competed before, so I didn't mind them dropping out. It was nice to have participants who had competition experience, at least either a local level, but we had members who were competed at the world championships, nationals, finals series, but it was a huge gambit. I mean, a huge variety there on skill levels and experience. Some people had 20 years experience. Some people just had that 1 year experience. But we put them in there. We did testing on. We used the InBody for body composition. We used a 3D scanner to figure out if there's any changes in circumferences. We did the counter movement jump and split jerk, which we actually used force plate data for our testing on that, which will be part of a second paper.
Okay.
And we tested the split jerk, 1 rep max at the beginning, mid, and end, and the 1 rep max back squat in the beginning and in the end to see any kind of strength changes. So the general structure of the testing.
So in terms of the volume, did you match the volume between the programs? So how did you go about one group not simply doing more and therefore getting better? Or
Yeah, so the AL group was performing the split jerk with the weight releasers, and for the first 5 weeks or 4 weeks, I went from 105% on the eccentric phase to 120%, with it stagnant at about 75% for the first 5 weeks. Then the concentric phase went up to 90% for the last few sets, but we dropped the reps from 3 to 1 while we did that. The traditional group performed the split jerk with the same load as the concentric phase, but then performed jerk dips at the eccentric load for the same amount of reps. So that was trying to an attempt to match as best we could, as well as give an alternative. Like jerk dips are something that's commonly used, and if the AL is similar to a jerk dip as far as benefits, then like maybe we do jerk dips, maybe we do AL, but there wouldn't be a huge reason one way or the other to do one or the other. So the outcomes we're looking for in this particular paper is body composition. So we're looking at fat-free mass, we're looking at muscle mass, weight changes, etc. We're also looking at the 1 rep max of the back squat and the 1 rep max of the split jerk. Specifically, we're looking at those strength changes as measured by the 1 rep max, as well as anything going on with body composition.
so let me just reiterate what we know so far. So 8 weeks of training, 2 types of training, one using accentuated eccentric loading and one putting similar load on the athlete using dips and jerks separately.
And we were using cluster sets for the jerk so we could put the weight releasers back on for the AL group. And then we mandated the traditional group to rack it, get set, and then come back out. So we had about 10 seconds interset rest for each group when they perform the split jerk. There's been some research saying we probably could have just gotten away with doing accentuated eccentric loading on the first rep and we'd still have a benefit for probably about 3 repetitions. But given that we're only doing 3 repetitions, we're only doing 10 working sets, these are experienced weightlifters, we might as well just kind of give them the stimulus as much as we can to see if we can find a difference here.
All right, are we ready for the results?
Yeah.
Let's go.
So for the results, what we did find is we didn't see much difference on body composition, which is no big surprise. Neither group saw large muscle gains or weight loss or fat-free mass, etc. No changes really in that. And outside of, the back squat where we're doing sets of 5 repetitions, we didn't really have a lot of exercises that probably would stimulate quite a bit of hypertrophy, especially with experienced lifters. So no big changes there. On the back squat, we had an interesting outcome because we had an outlier. We had someone that during their back squat on the post test was just not able to perform. They complained of hip pain. They were in this accentuated eccentric loading group. So if we include that outlier, it looks like their about neck and neck. Maybe the traditional group is a little bit higher, but if we take them out, then it looks like the accentuated eccentric loading group has performed a little bit better. But there's quite a bit of murkiness, partly because it is a smaller study. On the split jerk, however, we see some evidence to indicate that there might have been a better performance using the accentuated eccentric loading. Not at mid-intervention. At mid-intervention, they look fairly similar, but at post-intervention, we do see the averages tending to be a little bit more around 3.5 kilos towards AEL. Now, again, quite a bit of uncertainty here with the confidence interval crossing zero, so we're not quite sure, but the evidence does seem to indicate that we do get that benefit after at least 8 weeks of training. That just is not there in the first 4 weeks. Now, if you remember, when we did the mid-interventions testing, neither group had done anything over 75% of their 1 rep max overhead. And both groups did improve their jerk at mid-intervention as well as post. So no one was mad at me at the end of the study because they wasted 8 weeks of training. But at mid-intervention, they looked pretty similar, but again, not at post. Post, there does seem to be some evidence to indicate that we are seeing a little bit of benefit with the AL group. Not conclusive.
So do you think it's more related to the duration of the intervention or to the load not being above 75%?
At mid, well, both groups did improve their split jerk. And both of them only did. I think my opinion is that there was some movement disruptions and changing of how the athletes performed the split jerk with the weight releasers. I think they needed longer to acclimate to it to really get the benefit. Or it could have been that they just needed longer to get that training intervention. They needed more stimulus in order to achieve it. There is other studies that have looked at AEL and they did not see much of a benefit until after the 5-week mark. And those that were able to see benefits in less than 5 weeks have a more tailored approach to how they eccentrically load the athlete. There was one study on the leg press where they actually kind of did a 1 rep max eccentric load test for the leg press, and they had what load the person could control for a 5-second eccentric phase was determined to be their 1 rep max in the eccentric, and then they used percentages based on that. And they were able to see a benefit within, I think it was like in 4 weeks, they were able to see a difference between the two groups. Now, obviously, we didn't do that. And there, again, some evidence indicates stronger athletes, more experienced athletes are going to be able to take the eccentric loading and get a better benefit from it initially. And that some of the weaker athletes or athletes that just really have not the same training experience, they may not get as much benefit of it or might need longer to adjust to that type of training intervention. Again, this is guessing.
Okay, let's go there though, because I think it has practical implications. So if the coach would decide, oh, let me try, that sounds promising. And I have this one particular athlete who is really struggling, so I may want to experiment with them. Now, how long they should expect to have this transition and learning phase for the athlete? Because it sounds like the experience of the athlete matters. It sounds like that more efficient technically athletes will have, and more adapted to heavy weights, athletes will have better time accommodating to this intervention. So how the coaches should think about implementing this technique in the day-to-day training?
Yeah, totally. So there's a few things. One, if you're doing the jerk like this, you're going to be separating it from the clean. So you're not going to have as much time to be doing the clean and the jerk together. Now, could you do it? Yes, but you have less training time to be able to do that. So for the most part, you need to get this far enough away from a competition where you have enough time to really break down and to change the technique of the athlete, get them stronger in that breaking phase. So far enough away from the competition. To the evidence, again, you need longer than a few weeks. You need to do this, stick with this intervention for at least the evidence here, at least 8 weeks to see if there's going to be a benefit here. So those would be the two. So far enough away from competition, and then making sure that we have at least 8 weeks. That's going to be the two important factors if you're going to try to use AEL for your athletes.
Now, in terms of the setting up the exercise, how would you recommend going about that?
Yeah, so it does take a little bit of while to get acclimated and to set this up. Most of the weight releasers that you're going to be able to get, the ones that are like Rogue makes, for instance, they're pretty nice at this point. They're not long enough to come off during the dip phase. So you need to take your pull blocks and you actually need to set those up next to you while you do this. So you can perform the dip, the weight releasers come off when they hit the the pull blocks, and then you perform the split jerk. So that's going to take a little while. I recommend people to you're gonna have to guess when you first put the weight releasers. You put them on, put a clip on the outside of them so they don't rattle off when they walk out, because that bar does oscillate even with especially with the jerk weight releasers. So put a little clip on them, have them walk out, just have them perform the dip initially and see if they come off. Then have them perform a push press, so they dip down, see if they come off, they drive it up. And then the third time, then they can perform the split jerk. And we usually, in order to get people acclimated, had them do 3 repetitions of the split jerk with just the empty bar and the empty weight releasers so they could get used to it. And then we warmed them up to the working weight like you normally would warm up.
And in terms of going through all the loading and so on, how fast the athlete is able to grasp. And because I think if something is falling off while you're lifting, as a weightlifter, it is a bit nerve-wracking at the beginning. So how to go about that?
Well, that's partly a reason why we did start with about 105%. But if the athlete is particularly nervous about it, or the coach is particularly nervous about, there's no reason why you have to do super maximal for the first one. You can get them acclimated, at a weight that they're feeling comfortable with and confident at, 80% on the eccentric phase and, even 60% on the concentric. There's just no reason that you have to load them up, and unless you're, doing a study where you're like, I have you for 8 weeks, I need to train you quickly. So if you have enough run up, let them have time, let them get adjusted to it. Maybe start with a push press if they're not quite confident, they want to remain in better contact with the ground and not having to go off into their split position. So those are ways to get people acclimated to it. When you get to that 120% load, that does bring in a lot of factors of people being comfortable. So they can safely perform it at 120% on the eccentric phase, give them time. Don't get there quickly. We had them get up to 120% in week 4. But then when they saw it again in, I believe, week 8, they performed so much better. They were much more confident. They felt good about it. They were excited for it. So it looked better than the first time we did it at week 4.
Did you do force plate testing with the releases or
No.
no? Okay.
Yeah, so that actually is another study that I would love to do and has been suggested. Parsing out that data is much, much more difficult with the force plate data. Now, there's been some studies that have done movements and looked at the force data with weight releasers coming off, so I can borrow from those methods, talk to those people, but we have not done that yet, and it's going to be probably something I do in the next year.
PhD.
Yeah, right.
Oh, come on.
Yes, they even talked to me about it, but
What would be your advice for the coaches and the lifters from this study?
Yeah, so kind of bringing it back, I would recommend that, if people are really finding it hard to develop that braking strength in their split jerk, this may be a form of training intervention that could be helpful for you. If you're going to incorporate it, make sure that you're, 12, 16 weeks out or further out from a competition, and that you're able to kind of separate your clean from your jerk and have some changes in your technique that are going to take some time to develop. So at least 8 weeks of that training intervention, and then have some fun play around with the different loading of the eccentric phase and the concentric phase to see kind of what works for you that doesn't overkill you and that you're able to do it. We found the most success, or we seem to have found success, when we're doing at least 10 working sets per week. So, that is quite a bit of commitment for some people to be getting that type of stimulus into their training program. And we did see, our training population was 1-year-olds, training background of just a year up to almost 16 to 20 years. So seems my best guess is it's going to work better at more senior people that have problems with the jerk and that have problems specifically with the dip phase of the jerk.
So how would you define problems with the dip? How it manifests in the lifter?
Yeah, so when you hit the bottom of the dip, you have to brake. You have to decelerate that load, your center of mass, and then reaccelerate it. This could either be you having a longer braking phase, you're just not generating that rate of force development during the braking phase. You can see it by just someone having a very long dip, and then kind of at the bottom of the dip having a hard time being able to change directions and come back up. So those are the things the coach would be looking for on that front. Now, are you going to, change everything about their dip? No, probably not. But, especially if they have experience, but we can get small incremental benefits from it. Great. 3 6 kilos on your jerk means you may win. You may be on a podium. So that would be hugely beneficial. But again, 3 to 6 kilos is huge. I was going to say, as far as, we didn't look at bar path, which is another thing that we could have looked at. Do we see any changes in bar path trajectory? Like, we know we want to dip straight down and then drive up, and it should go back. I think it's on average 2 centimeters on the split jerk. So we didn't look at any changes of those bar trajectory. We did look at braking phase duration and other markers, but that's going to be the other paper.
Oh, can't wait. What I wanted to say also is, when we were considering how you set up the study and you were saying, oh, in literature, about 5 weeks is needed for, if you're very specific with your loading, but you did 8, and it seems to be the time that is needed. And it may seem long for some people, but if you think you have an experienced lifter who is devoting 8 weeks to improving their jerk 3 to 6 kilos, it may be well worth it. It may be all they need to cross the bridge to making a team or winning a medal at the national championship or so on. So 8 weeks for 3 or 6 kilos may be very well worth for an athlete who stagnated in the jerk or really struggles and is progressing really well in other lifts, being snatch and clean. So it has to be considered in a context.
And it also, there's nothing more depressing than standing up an easy clean and missing a jerk. It's so demoralizing. And so, being able to improve it or get that jerk a little bit closer to that clean is just, put smiles on lifters' faces.
100%. All right. I always finish with 2 short questions. The first one is, what is your favorite lift?
Split jerk when it's working, or the snatch when it's working. So it's between the two. For me, there's nothing better than when the snatch feels on and you just feel great. And I've never been a strong snatcher. I can make light weights look good, and then I never could make heavy weights look good. And then the split jerk, similar, when it's on and you feel strong, and it's just the ultimate statement. You stand up that clean, you hit the jerk, lights out. It's great.
Awesome. And the last question is where people can find you online if they want to follow your work, ask a question, or see when the new paper is coming up.
Yes, I'm on Instagram at KURTROD, Kurt Rod. I mostly just repost a lot of videos of my particular athletes as they train and tag me. So active, but not putting any content on there. And then if people do have questions or want to get in touch with me, email is usually my best, and that's KURTROD@gmail.com. I'm much more diligent at replying to email than I am on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kurt. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.